Hello and welcome to the Gooner Tour. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of not just a tactical breakdown, but the second episode of our brand new series of the Managerial Tactical Breakdown show. Now, if you tuned in for yesterday's show, I was joined by John Driscoll from the La Liga Weekly, and we discussed Luis Enrique and what it might be like if the Spaniard was to join Arsenal. And in our second episode, which is, as you can notice, a pre-recorded one. Some of these will be live, some of these will be pre-recorded based on timings and availability and other things like that. All menial stuff that you don't need to worry about because you're getting the content anyway. But in today's show, we're going to be talking about a Austrian Bundesliga manager, or former Austrian Bundesliga manager, now turned Bundesliga manager, because there is in fact another Bundesliga, for those that don't know, in the Austrian part of Europe. And I'm absolutely brilliant to be joined this week by Tom Midler from the Other Bundesliga Podcast. If you're not already checking out things that are going on in Austria, you should, because as long-time listeners of the show will know, I myself am a massive fan of the Austrian Bundesliga, in particular a certain Red Bull Salzburg, which is part to do with the manager that we're talking about today. Any excuse to wear the shirt because of all of the fantastic youth players that have come from that team, all because of course, it's just I end up talking about these players and they're all at blooming Liverpool in Sadio Mane and Naby Keita. But there are others like Deo Upamecano and of course my absolute love for the legend that was Jonathan Soriano. But I'm going off on a tangent now, because if you get me talking about Austrian teams and in particular RBS, then I go on a bit of a tangent. But we're talking this week to Tom about Marco Rose as a possible candidate for Arsenal. Now, of course, Marco Rose no longer resides in Austria. He resides at Borussia Mönchengladbach, of which he is at his first season and doing fantastically well, as you will hear in just a second. But let's get straight into the show. But before we do, please give the show a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you are new, and obviously turn those notifications on so you can join our live shows, raw reactions, podcasts, even some of these managerial tactical breakdowns too. But we're going to jump straight into the first question to Tom, which revolves around Red Bull Salzburg themselves, because before Marco Rose was in charge, they were already a dominant side in the league, but he took them from not just this dominant Austrian team to one that competed in Europe. Now, how did he do it?
Hey everyone, so the first question, how did Marco Rose take an already successful Salzburg side from the Oscar Garcia era and lift them up a level on the European stage? Well, it's hard to break that down really quickly, but the basis of it is in the fact that Marco Rose was one of the early proponents of this high pressing system, which is so popular now. He was really immersed in that as a coach from his time as a youth team trainer in the Salzburg setup. So once he got a chance to take charge of the first team, he really knew how he wanted this high press to work. And he's credited as being one of the most effective coaches in making the high press work. And it was that philosophy of sort of marrying this high press attack with a style of football that won Salzburg the ball back really quickly and stopped opponents from breaking. That was what allowed Salzburg to cause some really shocking results in the Europa League over the last few years. They already had the building blocks in place from the Garcia era, it's fair to say, but Rose really elevated them up a level. They won all their games in the Europa League group stages last year. That's no mean feat. They reached the semi-finals the year before that, and for a really unheralded, unknown Salzburg side, that was really impressive. And he did a really great job at Salzburg. It's just a shame, after finally qualifying them for the Champions League, he wasn't there to take them through their first campaign at that top level. But yes, basically it revolved around a 4-4-2 diamond in the midfield, and using that diamond, the angles and the different variations and flexibility that you can create using that 4-4-2 diamond, pushing them forward towards the attacking two. So then you've got almost 6 players around the edge of the area who can play this complex kind of passing play, keeping the pressure going until they can pull a hole in the opposition defence or just find a really good scoring opportunity with an incisive ball from near the edge of the area. They didn't play with almost any width at all. It was just the fullbacks under Marco Rose that provided the width, and they were quite reluctant to cross at times as well, preferring to keep the ball in and around the D for this complex passing. And if you imagine that, that also meant that if Salzburg lost the ball high up the pitch, there were so many players around that they'd often be able to win the ball back straight away. And using that, they were able to overrun teams such as Lazio, Dortmund. A lot of big names came to Salzburg in the last few years and were beaten in knockout ties. In fact, Marco Rose never lost a home game in charge at Salzburg.
Now, one of the things that, whilst we can get frustrated with Unai Emery about week on week, is something that's good is that the youth production is going through, and we're seeing more youth players get into that first team, the likes of Joe Willock, buying younger players like Martinelli, seeing players like Nelson go out on loan and come back again. And RBS of Red Bull Salzburg, of course, is hugely known for their youth production, but Marco Rose was bringing through youth players and using them extremely well. But I want to know, Tom, whether or not this was simply down to RBS's use of youth players and promotion of youth players, or was it actually a lot of credit towards the manager?
Does Marco Rose have youth in his fabric, or is that just part of the Red Bull Salzburg setup? Good question. Well, they definitely go hand in hand. Salzburg, of course, have an incredible youth team, incredible youth talent levels. They've got scouts all around the world looking out for the best young talents. In fact, they're probably one of the best clubs in Europe, if not the world, in terms of their scouting. Really, it's that good. Their networks worldwide are really incredibly good at discovering talent. So it's no surprise that so many good young players have come up through Salzburg. Rosa was definitely a part of that, though. He coached at their U16, U18 levels, U19 as well. He won championships with them, including the UEFA Youth League, which is a very impressive feat for that Salzburg side to win that. You know, that's as big as you can get in terms of youth team competition. So Rosa certainly knows what he's doing with young players. He was also adept at bringing those young players through into the Salzburg first team, a lot of whom have gone on to bigger and better things, but they were also there at Salzburg for his successes, both domestically and in Europe. You're looking at players like Sava Schlager, Hannes Wolf. There's an almost endless list of great young talent at Red Bull Salzburg, and a lot of them will have nothing but praise really for Marco Rose. What I would say is Rosa doesn't depend on youth, but he's certainly very, very good at working with young players. And it's more to do with Marco Rosa. It's more about finding the right players to fit his style and to do what he wants. And I would say he doesn't need them to be young players or youth players, but he's certainly not afraid of playing with youth players and using youth players to get the job done and perhaps to unearth more quality players for the future.
Now, being an avid follower of Red Bull Salzburg, you have to get used to the fact that people and players and coaches will leave. Because it just happens. Sadio Mane, Dayot Upamecano, Marcel Sabitzer, after spending a decent loan there, has gone back to RB Leipzig and smashed it. And managers too, and Marco Rose is no different and has now resided in Borussia Mönchengladbach, where he's doing extremely well. And Tom is going to tell you all about that.
So yeah, Marco Rose's time at Salzburg earned him a move to the German Bundesliga with Borussia Mönchengladbach. How has he done since moving up to the German league? Well, the answer is really, really well. In fact, almost too well at the start of the season, which sounds a bit strange to say. The chairman and the fans of Gladbach have been really, really happy with what he's done. And they've even been saying recently that they're a bit worried that he might have increased expectations too much, too quickly. And that can always create a bit of danger at a club when the fans expect so much. What he's done so far this season is turned Gladbach into what look like title contenders. They're top of the Bundesliga and have been for a few weeks, and they look very much active in that push for the Champions League places. Who knows, if they can maintain a title challenge later on in the season, that would be a really, really impressive feat for a side who are really operating nowhere near on the budget of the top sides in Germany. So really good effort there. They've suffered some pretty bad defeats as well. They actually were beaten in the Europa League by one of the other Austrian sides, Wolfsberger, 4-0. That was a real shock for them at home, but actually their Europa League campaign is looking okay, and they've still got a good chance of making it through to the knockout phases of the Europa League, which would constitute a success, I suppose, in Rosa's first season. They were knocked out of the DFB Cup as well by Dortmund, but overall the players have adapted to Rosa's style really, really quickly. He's been credited with getting rid of a lot of players and making the most of the players who were available to him, recalling some players from loans, getting the best out of the players that were there at Gladbach already, and just adding one or two key signings, players like Briel Embolo, who've really fitted the way that he wants to play football. So at the moment, everyone's very, very happy with how Marco Rose is doing at Gladbach.
Now, the biggest question, of course, when talking about managers and then their possibility of joining Arsenal is the prospect of that process. How might they fare? So, Tom, would it be a success or not?
would Marco Rose have an impact at Arsenal? It's always really difficult to speculate on such things, but I think he would certainly have some kind of impact, not least because I think Rose would take a look at that Arsenal dressing room, and I think he wouldn't be afraid to make a few cuts and get rid of some players. He really likes to have players around him who fit his style perfectly, and he's happy whoever they are, big names or not. He wants players that are going to do that and they're going to fall in line with the way he plays football. And I think if he did come to Arsenal, it would cause a bit of a stir, because I think you'd see perhaps some high-profile exits and maybe try and stabilise the dressing room as well.
Now, in terms of style of play and how it suits the Premier League, that's always going to be a big factor. Talking to John yesterday about Luis Enrique, we weren't really sure he would work in an attacking sense, but defensively, I'm not so sure. So in terms of the style of play, how would it fit the Premier League vibe?
With regard to life in the Premier League for Marco Rose, I think he would definitely do well in the Premier League. It's always hard to know, but I feel like a top quality coach, and I certainly regard him as a top quality coach, I feel like these guys are adaptable enough that they can cope when they move up a level or to a different level. I think the thing is in the Premier League, that even the smaller clubs, really on the European scale, have such a big budget and such good players, even the bottom half teams in the Premier League, that they are able to adapt very quickly. So if you're a kind of a one philosophy coach, you can find yourself getting caught out within a few seasons. And I think that would be a bit of a danger for Marco Rose at the moment. We don't know how adaptable he is to a club when his philosophy and style isn't working. We might find that out later on in the season at Gladbach this year as well, in the German Bundesliga. But I certainly think his style of play involves a lot of pacey players, a lot of powerful players. And Arsenal already have a couple of those with Aubameyang for sure. I think that he's got a lot of young players. He would have a lot of young players at his disposal at Arsenal as well, that he'd be able to get a lot out of. And I think his results would be very good. He's a top-level coach. He would be taking it to the likes of Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola, and I think he would really relish a challenge against those kind of guys. Hard to know exactly how he would do in the Premier League, but I think he's got all the tools there to do well at that level. Is a move to Arsenal likely though? This is the point where I don't think it is at the moment. I think it's a bit of speculation to suggest that Rose would be able to go there. Gladbach moved really, really quickly to secure his services from Salzburg. He was really impressed by that. They really put a lot of effort into getting their man, Marco Rose, and they did it. And it seems like it should be the start of a long and healthy relationship between Marco Rose and Borussia Mönchengladbach. You never know in the world of football, nothing's for sure. But I think... Of course, Arsenal is perhaps a step up from a club like Gladbach, but he's just come in there, he's just signed a new contract there, his first contract there, and I'd expect to see him sticking around for a while unless things go south at Gladbach.
And there you have it. Everything that you could possibly desire to know about Marco Rose is now implanted in your brain. And you can go and tell everyone how fantastic the German manager is, because he is fantastic. And he is my personal choice, which is why I was so excited to finally get this video out to you guys so you can get a little bit more educated on Marco Rose. But a huge thank you to Tom Midler from the Other Bundesliga Podcast. Please do go check out their stuff. It's some really, really fantastic stuff going on about a lesser known league that you should definitely learn a little bit more about. All the links to his podcast, the latest one, the link to that will be in the description too. So please do go check that out. We will be back again very soon for another managerial tactical breakdown. I don't know when yet, I don't know who yet, but we will find out and see very, very soon. If you've enjoyed this series, please, of course, give the show a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you are new to get even more info about possible candidates that could join Arsenal. I will see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.